Well, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves is finally out, and I have to say, this movie exceeded my expectations. I've been excited for this thing ever since the first teaser trailer, but I did eventually start to worry that the Marvel-y action comedy tone would be kind of stale. And even my hype video was just as much about the idea of bringing D&D to the big screen as it was about this actual film. Realistically, I expected a B-tier Marvel movie with some cute D&D references, and what I got was an S-tier Marvel movie with more love for D&D than I could have ever asked for. It's not perfect, and tonally, I wouldn't call it massively different from most of the MCU, but it executes that style better than anything Disney has put out lately. If you ask me, the MCU owes its success to three things: humor, world building, and action scenes. And I want to talk about how Honor Among Thieves gets all three of those right while avoiding the pitfalls recent Marvel pictures have fallen into. Before I get into it though, I'll say that there will be some light spoilers. I won't give away big plot twists or anything like that, but if you want to go in completely blind, maybe wait until after to watch this video. Anyway. The highest praise I can give Honor Among Thieves is that it's really fucking funny. Maybe it's because I watched it with my college RPG club and we took up a whole row of seats together, but I can't remember the last time I laughed so hard in a movie theater. I'm not going to go through the techniques of every individual joke, not only because that would probably be tiresome, but because in an action comedy, the placement of the jokes is just as, if not more important. I think a big reason why so many people latched onto the MCU, especially starting with the first Avengers film, was its ability to provide cathartic moments of humor at the resolution of tense moments. For the most part, humor comes from a playful subversion of expectations, and it's often most effective when those expectations are thrown off by a suspenseful or dramatic scene. If you've been taking Loki seriously as an overconfident but threatening villain, it's both hilarious and satisfying to see the Hulk toss him around like a ragdoll in the climax. That first Avengers movie was also good at establishing the characters through funny remarks, from Captain America's old-timey optimism
There's only one God, man, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that.
to Stark's deadpan bravado.
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
But as the MCU went on, it started to lose track of what made its comedic moments work. For one, it became so eager to make jokes at the expense of its antagonists that it made their threat level seem essentially non-existent. Earlier movies usually waited until a climactic turning point to make their villains look foolish, but now Marvel seems like they've lost that sense of patience. In something like Thor: Love and Thunder, we have our heroes stopping in the middle of a heated battle to joke at each other for extended periods, and it's just impossible to get invested in the conflict at that point. For me at least, it's also harder to laugh at the jokes, given how out of place they feel. The other problem is that the comedic dialogue is now rarely used to make the characters stand out. Out of the original Avengers, Tony Stark was really the only sarcastic quip machine of the bunch. But Marvel must have realized he was the easiest to write jokes for, so they made about 8 billion other characters with the same sense of humor. In the end, the characters started to blur together, and the jokes started to feel forced. Honor Among Thieves avoids both of those problems. Its villains are never the butt of jokes until the very end of the movie, but they also don't clash with the overall comedic tone. There are some jokes playing on Forge Fitzwilliam's egotism, but they also emphasize his control over the city as we see his likeness inscribed on massive statues and balloons. There are also a lot more jokes playing on the heroes getting in way over their heads, which do create a fair amount of tension, especially for such a lighthearted film. To address that second issue of characters blurring together, Honor Among Thieves does an excellent job establishing and developing its characters through humor. Maybe better than any Marvel movie outside Guardians of the Galaxy. Take any funny line from any of the characters, and it probably wouldn't work if someone else in the party was saying it. And a lot of these jokes carry more weight than you might think. Take the bit where Simon is trying to cast Speak with Dead, and someone else comments how arbitrary it is that they can only ask 5 questions, and Simon insists in frustration that that's just how it works. On one level, it's just, haha, D&D spells are really arbitrary. And on another, it's Simon wondering whether the entire idea of being a sorcerer is just ridiculous at a time when he's doubting himself the most. It's a really solid example of humor enhancing character development and vice versa, and there are plenty of moments like this throughout the film.
Me Too shits will return in whatever, who cares?
You've probably heard this a million times, but the MCU's dozens of interconnected but mostly standalone movies really are without precedent in film history. We got hyped for a massive crossover in Phase 1, and once the connections were established, it was fun to see characters show up in new corners of the franchise in Phases 2 and 3. It felt rewarding to longtime fans, and casual viewers wouldn't be confused as to who that green guy was. That was the case, at least for a while. Eventually, Marvel's shared universe became a victim of its own success, and Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness might be the clearest example of a narrative that misuses its surrounding franchise. I'm not just talking about how it tries to follow up an entire TV show without really knowing how to build on its ending. That's not quite as relevant when comparing it to a franchise that's just getting started. What matters more is something like the Illuminati. Those characters are only given a threadbare connection to Doctor Strange's story, and their scenes are clearly a backdoor pilot for future installments. They only leave the audience scratching their heads before they're promptly thrown out of the narrative. Honor Among Thieves very well could have fallen into this trap. It visits a ton of locales and side characters and clearly wants to set up a franchise, and I'd even say it's packed with D&D fan service. But it has basically zero shared universe baggage. In my eyes, it works because those characters and locations have a point. That might sound obvious and reductive, but it's not something we should take for granted. In Multiverse of Madness, the Illuminati don't really do anything. They show up, give some vague exposition about how they're the secret guardians of the multiverse, have a battle that Doctor Strange is barely involved in, and then are just gone. In Honor Among Thieves, they set up the Red Wizards of Thay, which carries some implications beyond the movie itself, but they are used as an important catalyst that drives Forge into villainy. We have a detour where the heroes get chased by a dragon through the Underdark, but it's pretty relevant to the plot. It also allows for some great little character moments, like when Zenk leaps in to save Edgin and says, "You would have done the same for me," when it's pretty obvious he wouldn't. If we're talking about the related concept of fan service, there's the Speak with Dead scene I mentioned earlier. It's a wink and a nod at D&D tropes, sure, but it also has some emotionally charged dialogue. This movie reaffirms that you can very well have a coherent, fast-paced adventure with all the references you need, and you can leave audiences wanting more without shouting, "Please be excited for the spin-off!" The key is to just not lose focus of your main plot and characters.
For this list, we've piled together the most action-packed, thrilling, and fan-pleasing battles in anime TV history.
Marvel movies and the like face a few inherent problems when it comes to their action sequences. A big part of the thrill of seeing characters fight is the tension, the primal fear of not knowing what's going to happen next. This can be hard to establish when you have a main character with literal superpowers who has multiple films lined up for their future. Not to mention that those films are generally lighthearted and can't show graphic violence. It's not an unsolvable problem because you can have stakes that don't involve the main characters dying. And even if you don't, our lizard brains can usually ignore that if the fight is cool enough in itself. But that's the thing, you have to make the fight stand out. If you can't get the audience swept away in the spectacle, they'll start to look behind the curtain and feel how empty the scene really is. Modern Marvel movies face two major issues on this front: bad special effects and stale choreography. Marvel's VFX just aren't up to the standard it used to set, likely because the artists are unreasonably pressed for time, and additionally, a lot of the fights feel like something we've seen before. Black Panther Wakanda Forever isn't the worst offender, but Iron Man suits slamming into each other in the sky and superhuman brawlers duking it out in a rocky field aren't new to this franchise, which makes it easier for audiences to check out of the climactic battle. Now, let's look back at the D&D movie. For one, it actually has some tension. It's fairly plausible that not every main character will survive, and a lot of them have other goals that they might not feasibly achieve. Maybe more importantly, the fight scenes have novelty spilling out of their bag of holding. If I have to give one reason for this, it's that all of the main characters have unique abilities and fighting styles. The MCU, at least at this point, has a lot of characters with just vague super strength, and it's hard to make them stand out on the battlefield. In Honor Among Thieves, there's hardly any overlap between powers. It's actually a departure from the tabletop game to have the druid and the bard not cast spells, but I think it serves the movie well to give each character a better defined niche. Besides that, the action scenes have a pretty unique premise that's not just, here's some bad guys, now fight to the death. Even the fight centered around the barbarian against a bunch of guards relies on improvisation, which makes it inherently different from a standard duel with weapons. And I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but just as I predicted in my video leading up to this movie, the D&D source material just keeps on giving. Iconic spells and monsters deliver so many great moments, and I think there's a ton more to do in this universe. So in the end, I think this movie is pretty awesome for what it is. It's not the most ambitious thing in the world, but it packs a ton of fun into a tightly scripted narrative. If you have any affection for D&D, or even if you just want a really solid fantasy adventure comedy, I can't recommend it enough. But I want to hear what you think. Whether you're a D&D veteran or had no idea what that bird thing was, feel free to share your opinion in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for 1,000 subscribers, and I will see you all next time.